everyone, and welcome to the Rumcast. We are the podcast that talks all things rum-related with the people who love and shape it. I am really excited for the episode we have lined up for you today. We're sort of launching what we hope to be, I guess, will be a new series on the podcast where we can talk specifically about rum from just one single country and sort of put together a guide for those that want to know more. But before we do that, let's make sure to check in with my brother from another mother, the muck to my dunder, you might say, Will Hookinga. Will, I know you just got back recently from the American Distilling Institute's Rum Summit in New Orleans down there, so I'm really curious to hear about that and how that went.
You're a New Orleans guy when you say the name, huh?
I guess so. I'm New Orleans, yes. Is that? What do you say?
I say New Orleans. I don't know what the right way to say it is, but
It's Orleans.
That might be it. But yes, I did. I did a presentation at the ADI Rum Summit. It was really cool. It was just a little one-day event hosted at Lula Restaurant and Distillery. It's like a restaurant and distillery together down there in New Orleans. Mm-hmm. So got to share the stage with some great presenters. And also something I was really looking forward to was finally visiting a few of the New Orleans rum distilleries that, I've been able to taste some of their product, but had not visited in person. So that was really cool. I visited 3 places, well, 4 including Lula, but they were kind of opposite spectrum. So like Rulazon, and then another place called Happy Raptor that's pretty new, and they're very, very small distilleries.
Yeah, I hadn't heard of them. Mm-hmm.
I also got a chance to go out to Porch Jam Distillery, they're the makers of Share Me Rum, which I've talked about on the podcast as well, fresh cane juice rum. They're on the other end. They're like basically, I think they're technically maybe considered a craft distillery, but they are much bigger production-wise than the average craft distillery. Not big in the sense that they have like an elaborate tasting room and like they don't do tours and stuff like that. But it's just a big facility with a lot of capacity. So got to see like opposite ends of the spectrum. But people making really interesting rum, and that was super cool. So also got to see some more of like the aging stuff that they're doing at Porch Jam with Share Me Rum, so got to try like some aged Queen Share and stuff. That's a little over a year now. Very, very promising stuff down there that I'm excited about. And then over at Rulazon as well, it had actually been a few years since I had tried any of their aged rum, and so getting to taste it now a few years later. They had one cask that I think it was a used Cabernet cask. Ooh, cool. And it was one of the few 53-gallon barrels that they have, because they do a lot of aging in smaller barrels and things like that, and that can go sideways sometimes, but they're one of the distilleries that I think actually does that well. But anyway, so this cab barrel, really interesting, and they also had some small rye barrels as well I was able to taste. But so just got to see some positive developments with a few distilleries that I've been following for a little while now, and I'm kind of a fan of. So that was really cool. And then the conference itself was really interesting because the audience, it wasn't a consumer audience. It was the people in attendance there, like people who already own distilleries or are wanting to get into it.
Distillers. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so it was, everyone's presentation except for mine was because I don't have technical expertise, but a lot of it was technical focus, and really a lot of focus on sugarcane and molasses. That was really interesting. They had one presenter, his name's Dr. Kenneth Gravois. He kind of leads the LSU Ag Center's Sugar Research Station. Mm-hmm. So he gave this whole presentation of just about like the sugar refining process and like how molasses is produced from that and the different kinds of molasses that come out of it and everything. And it was just when like combining that with Roberto Serrayes of Don Q and Distillery of Serrayes gave a presentation as well, and went like deep into their molasses sourcing and stuff. And just as I was there, I was like, this is like the exact kind of information that aspiring rum distillers like need to hear. It just felt like very valuable information. So really cool, and just always good to get to connect and drink some rum. And yeah, it left me excited about the burgeoning Louisiana rum community.
Yeah, you've made me jealous on 2 fronts, which is one is we just don't seem to get some of those New Orleans rums down here in South Florida. I've never seen any. I'd love to see more of those and try them.
Well, I mean, and that's kind of the rub with the craft distilling thing is Rulazon very, very small. They have some distribution in some states and things like that, but and then Share Me is just new. So I think they're about to add a couple of states, but yeah, I would recommend if you're visiting New Orleans to look into those places I mentioned and check them out, because there's some exciting stuff happening down there. Louisiana has like a regional rum making feel that you don't get as much of a sense of in other parts of the US. Like you kind of have this starting to become like a critical mass of distilleries down there, and you have the sugar cane down there.
It's a movement.
And like all those distilleries that I mentioned, Porch Jam for Cherami Rum, they're using Louisiana cane juice. Roulisson, Happy Raptor, the other places, they're using Louisiana molasses and things like that. So you have this kind of natural regional thing happening that's pretty cool to see.
This is the silliest thing ever, but it can't be a coincidence that Porch Jam makes Cherami Rum, right? Like
what's the connection?
Cherami spoken. Yeah, Pearl Jam.
Oh wait, was that Jeremy?
Yes, but it sounds like Cherami.
Okay. That was a good Eddie Vedder. Yeah.
Thank you. That was my Eddie Vedder imitation. Yes.
Porch Jam, Pearl Jam.
Porch Jam,
wow.
Pearl Jam,
I hadn't even
Cherami,
made the connection at all.
Do they have another label coming out? And is it like, I don't know. Gosh, now I can't remember any of the other ones.
Yellow Lead Better. I had not made that connection before. The Cherami name actually it's a common surname in Louisiana, which I did not know, and it's actually the surname of one of their distillers there. Apparently, it means dear friend is what Cherami means.
That makes sense. That is a better explanation than mine, even though mine is interesting. Yes, I hope to get there soon and try it and hear more about it. Speaking of silly, I have another quick story for you that leads us into our topic today, which I know everybody should be hopefully as excited as we are to talk about Jamaican rum. But my quick story is this. I happen to be in our supermarket store down here, Publix. I think we mentioned this on another one where Publix isn't everywhere, but it's in Florida.
It's where I am. Yeah.
And it's our big supermarket.
It started in Alabama, actually.
Oh, did it? Oh, I didn't know that. But so anyways, we're walking through the aisles, which we haven't done in forever, right? Because COVID kind of, we were like not shopping on our own forever, but we're back to doing that, walking the aisles. And in this store in Publix, they have a food aisle that brings things imported from different countries.
Okay.
And so it's where I get my Ting soda from.
I was just about to ask if this was about you finding Ting or something.
Well, no, I have found Ting. Thankfully, it's down here, and I've been able to access that for a while, both the pink and the green, which is nice.
I didn't know there was a pink.
There is, and it's pretty good, actually.
Right.
I like that. Yeah, I even put the rum in it. I still think the classic is better, but I do like the pink. Right. Anyways, long story short, staring at me on the shelf is this thing that says rum on it, because anything that says rum on it is going to catch my attention. Yeah. And it says rum cake. Oh, and nice. So, of course, rum cake is a big thing. And, I'm sure many people here have tried rum cake, and rum cake can be really good. But I've never seen a pre-packaged. This one looked exactly like a Twinkie.
Really?
I shit you not.
That's
exactly
cool.
like a Twinkie, but it says rum cake on it, and it's from this place. I guess it's called Buccaneer. It's got the Jamaican flag on it. So okay. I'm not 100% sure here, and I didn't research it. But maybe it is imported from Jamaica. I'd have to find out, or maybe it's not. But anyway, so I'm like, you know what? It was like $1. I'm going to buy this thing just to try it.
Why not?
It's either going to be gross and I'll have a laugh, or it's going to be good and that'll be fun. Anyways, I get home and I try this, and it says, by the way, on the package, it's made with real rum, and it's like 0.5% alcohol.
I see it. So, I'm looking it up online right here.
Let me tell you, man, I freaking loved this thing.
Is it really good?
It was really good. It's not a Twinkie in the sense that it doesn't have a cream filling. It's just cake, like a petit gâteau, if you speak parlez-vous français, like a little small cake. Okay. It's rummy, but not a lot. Like, it's there, but it's not you're not getting any real alcohol vibe from this. It's just the rummy flavor.
Right.
But man, it's really nice. It was really good.
So I did some research for you.
Okay.
So this website, it says it is manufactured by the fastest growing wholesale bakery in Jamaica.
Hey,
which apparently is called Honey Bun.
Huh. Well, there you go. So it was an actual direct import from Jamaica, and let me tell you, if you happen to see this, and we should throw a picture of it up on our show notes. Yeah. It's nice. I mean, look, it still says artificial flavoring and stuff on it, so it's a Twinkie-ish product, but way better than a Twinkie.
I mean, it says with world famous Jamaican rum right there on the label.
It was pretty fantastic. I really enjoyed it, and hey, if you're looking for a little treat,
I'm gonna look for this in Publix now. I'm gonna have to take a trip.
in that food aisle where they have the imports, from different places, and try to find it. It was really good. So anyways, I figured that would tee us up for our conversation today about all things Jamaican rum specifically, and a guide to that. And Will, I know you've done a lot with putting some stuff together to talk about what makes Jamaican rum different or unique in some ways, and then the distilleries that do produce rum there on the island. So
yeah, I think kind of our goal with this episode is to give people an overview of just what are the active Jamaican rum distilleries, to know, what kind of makes them different from one another, what are the brands associated with the distilleries. We're also going to give some picks, recommendations, talk about some of our favorites. I think for each distillery, we're going to do like a less expensive, pick that we each like, and then a more expensive, money is no object kind of pick. And we're going to try to keep them accessible, not going to try to do some super esoteric, 200 bottle limited release that you can't buy unless you pay $1,000 at auction
or go to Jamaica and hope to find it sometimes. Yeah.
I think before we kind of dive into the distilleries, well, actually, let's just start out with like what the distilleries are that we're going to talk about, and then we can talk kind of high level about style a little bit. But so there are 6 active rum distilleries in Jamaica right now. You have Worthy Park, you have Hampden, you have Appleton Estate and New Yarmouth Estate, which are both under the Wray Nephew company, which is then owned by Campari. We'll get into all that later. Then you have National Rums of Jamaica, which within that you have the Clarendon Distillery, you have the Long Pond Distillery, and that's it. Oh, I got through 6 pretty fast. So those are the distilleries that we're going to be discussing. But I think before we dive too deeply into those, just quickly at a high level, what we see as the style of Jamaican rum. And this is actually funny. It's making me think of something I had talked about in my presentation at the ADI conference. My presentation was about misconceptions in rum and overcoming sort of the categorical confusion that exists in the category, especially if you're like a distiller who's new to the category and trying to make sense of it. And one of the things I talked about was what I think is a mistake that I see every now and then from American rum producers. And that was the audience, by the way. It was American producers. But I was essentially talking about how a lot of times I will see distilleries in the US kind of use other styles to describe the rum they're making. And they'll say something like, oh, we make a Jamaican style rum here. And when someone says something like that, I always like my eyebrows raise a little bit. The next thing I want to know is like, okay, so what is Jamaican style? Like, what are you doing to this rum to actually make it Jamaican style? And sometimes, I'm not saying all the time, but sometimes you'll get a response like, we use pot stills or something like that. And I'm like, well, I mean, pot stills are an element of some Jamaican rum and, or a traditional element for sure, but
many other places. Yeah.
The analogy that I used in the presentation was, saying that would be sort of like saying that you make a Scotch style whiskey because you age it in used casks or something like that. Like it's like this one thing that's like can be typical of the style, but doesn't define the whole thing.
Okay. Yeah.
So I think just from like a high level, when you hear Jamaican rum, what are your expectations? What are you thinking about? Whether it's like flavors or like what does it bring to mind for you?
Yeah. So for me, in my experience, I'm thinking it's typically got that fruity / funky kind of vibe. Not all of them do, to your point. But from when you say Jamaican rum, that's kind of what starts to come up in my mind, is whether it's high esters or something else in the process that's made it that fruity, funky type of thing, to varying degrees, right?
Yeah. I'm glad you led with fruity rather than funky, because I think funky is definitely an element of it. Yeah. But I think like even in an Appleton, for example, which to me, I don't really describe Appleton as funky, but it's got that like kind of ripe fruit quality to it, right. And that's something that I think is very expressive and kind of and really in a lot of ways kind of like brighter tropical fruits and things like that.
Tropical, right. Overripe banana also is something I hear very often.
Yeah. So that's kind of the first thing for me. And then, you talked about high ester. I think it's interesting because definitely in the sort of rum dork universe that we're steeped in, like high ester is something that immediately comes to mind, even though like high ester rum is like a small percentage of what's actually made in Jamaica. But those are definitely kind of the things that we gravitate toward. And high ester in general, there are other places that make high ester rum, but Jamaica is kind of the place that put that style on the map, and really like pioneered a lot of the techniques and things for making high ester rums. And it's interesting because if you listen to our second episode we did with Richard Seal about the Foursquare high ester rum, you may have seen that if you listened, you heard that he was very uncomfortable with describing it as a high ester rum. And if you keep up with social media, you may have seen that he put a little post on Facebook sort of announcing that they were changing the name and a little bit of an explanation. They ended up changing it from high ester to LFT, which stands for long fermentation type. And his explanation on Facebook was essentially Jamaica kind of pioneered high ester, like the terminology, they were associated with it and everything. And so he didn't, feel comfortable kind of like
co-opting that.
He felt like kind of, especially since he is, out there fighting the GI fight and kind of the intellectual property fight. He felt that was inconsistent. But my point in saying is that like high ester is, Jamaican rum is like steeped in that tradition. And when we say high ester rum, just to touch, like we won't get too deep into the science of it, but basically like spirits that you consume, whether it's rum or whiskey or whatever, they're going to have esters in them. Esters are just compounds that provide flavor. I believe it is when an alcohol and an acid join together, they form an ester.
It sounds like the birds and the bees conversation. When an alcohol and an acid join together,
and they love each other very much.
They love each other very much, yes.
But there's all these different alcohols and these different acids, and when they join, different ones form different esters, and different esters give different scents and tastes and things like that. Some are going to conjure things like, overripe banana, like we were talking about. Some might give you pineapple and things like that. And the interesting thing is that some of these can smell terrible on their own. Like the famous example that gets cited the most is like butyric acid. Smells like baby vomit on its own. But I forget which alcohol it is that it joins with. But when it joins with a particular one, it smells like it's either pineapple or banana, or something very pleasant,
Something nice happens.
And so high ester rums are going to be rums that have a very high level of esters in them. And so when you see one of those like Habitation Vellier labels or something like that says 555 grams per hectoliter of absolute alcohol, that's talking about ester count. Interestingly, in Jamaica, the way they measure the esters, they're only talking about ethyl acetate, which is like the most common ester, but there can be other esters present in there as well. And so Jamaica even historically has kind of a scale for measuring esters. You have things that are in the 80 to 150 range, are referred to as common clean rums. Then you have plumber rums, which are 150 to 200, Wedderburns, which are 200 to 300. And then in the 700 to 1600 range, they historically called that the flavored range. And
interesting.
Yeah, part of the reason for that was, I think it was in the early 20th century, if I'm remembering correctly, Germany started charging a lot more taxes for importing rum. And so clever business people somewhere decided, well, what if we could just import less Jamaican rum, but it was flavorful enough, to where we could sort of
like concentrated.
Exactly, like a rum concentrate. So they could take essentially neutral. I'm saying essentially a lot. I don't know why I keep saying that word. My apologies to everyone listening to this. You could take a neutral spirit and just add a little bit of this, what they called quote unquote flavored. And it's not flavored with like added flavors or something. They just described it, these high ester rums, as being continental flavored, because it was rums for the continent, Europe. And you can add a little bit of those to neutral spirit and get something that tastes like a very flavorful rum, even though you're only putting a little in there. You save a bunch on taxes. And that style of rum in Germany is called rum verschnitt. I think Ian Burrell talked a little bit about rum verschnitt on the episode he did with us. But there's this whole history of high ester rum production. There are a variety of interesting techniques for producing high ester rum. I think a common misconception that people have is, high ester means, they use dunder.
Better.
And
okay.
Oh, what were you going to say?
We took that two different directions. I agree with you, but I was going to say also in the kind of nerdy circles, the more esters equals better somehow.
Oh yeah, totally.
And I totally don't think that's the case. I do think it's more. It is not more interesting, but interesting in the sense when you see those higher counts to maybe taste what that tastes like. But to your point, I was going to say, Will, also that my understanding is that those really higher ester rums aren't something that was really drank on its own.
Yeah.
Until even very recently wasn't available on its own.
Yeah. Historically, we're really designed for blending purposes.
Right.
And it's really just been in recent years that you've started to see it's basically almost 100%, I would say, on the independent bottler side of third parties sourcing a particular high ester mark. That's another thing that you see at all the Jamaican distilleries is they have what they call, and you see this outside of Jamaica as well. Not everywhere uses this terminology. They use the terminology marks to describe basically different recipes for different rums. And typically these will have different ester levels as well. So, for example, Hampden's highest ester mark, DOK. Many listeners have probably heard of that and are familiar with it because you have a decent amount of independent bottlers now sort of doing these releases of just DOK on its own, which, like you were saying, the reason that was created in the first place was not for people to have on its own, but I talk to rum fans all the time who have it on its own and absolutely love it.
They adore it,
Yeah, we were talking on our latest happy hour with one of our patrons who loves a DOK rum and coke, or it might have been Savannah Her actually, another very high ester rum. But anyway, so it's kind of been in the modern era that people have had more of an opportunity to try these. But and I think one of the things I talk about on our myths and misconceptions episode was that like quality of rum scales linearly with ester count or something like that. I think there's definitely people out there who really enjoy trying to find the highest ester, funkiest rums possible and try them. And I'm on board with
the outer rim.
It's really fun and it's really instructive and educational to get to try rums like that. And a lot of times you find something that is really interesting and can be delicious even. But it's not some sort of thing where the more esters, like the more flavorful. Even describing it that way, I don't think it's always entirely accurate because you can have a lower ester rum that is super, super flavorful.
I agree.
It might not be as intense. Like when you
bold,
taste DOK, for example, it is intense concentration of very strong flavors.
Yes.
But so just a little background on kind of esters and stuff. And like I said, we'll get a little bit into some of the methods. But there's many different ways to create these high ester rums. Some involve things like dunder, muck, things like that. Some don't. Worthy Park, for example, is made a point to mention that they do not use things like dunder and muck in their rum production, and they are capable of producing some very high ester rums. So we'll get into that a little bit more when we get into these distilleries. But with all that said, should we just start running down? Maybe take a break and then jump into our first distillery?
Yeah, why don't we take a quick break and then we'll be back with going through the distilleries and then a couple of our picks at the end of what we want to recommend to people.
All right, so we are going to start this with what I think is probably, maybe with one exception, the most sort of universal door into Jamaican rum for rum enthusiasts, which would be Wray Nephew, which within that is both Appleton Estate and New Yarmouth Estate. New Yarmouth Estate isn't a name that you may have heard before, but that's okay. We'll get into that in a second. But basically, within Wray Nephew, you have all the Appleton rums, and then you also have Wray Nephew Overproof, which is probably the most iconic Jamaican rum, the best-selling rum in Jamaica, and just that style of, unaged overproof rum that I think is strongly associated with Jamaican rum.
Yeah, I agree. Anybody who thinks Jamaican rum, it's going to be hard to think about it too long before you come to these two brands, right?
Yes, for sure.
No matter where you are kind of in the world even, it seems like these are just very high profile, well-known, and for good reason, right? Because as you mentioned, Wray Nephew, the overproof is the best-selling brand in Jamaica, and then Appleton's, one of, for sure, the best-selling Jamaican rums outside of Jamaica, and you see it everywhere in cocktails and drinks, and, other rums that you can absolutely sip neat as well. So they've got a pretty large cast of different offerings.
Yeah, large cast is a good way to put it, because I think, and we'll kind of break these distilleries down a little bit. Obviously, the Appleton products, Appleton branded stuff comes from Appleton Estate.
Right.
And I think one of the reasons Appleton rums are such kind of like a gateway into Jamaican rum, like obviously is accessibility, wide distribution and things like that, but it's also the range, like you said, a large cast. I don't really think any of the other distilleries have a branded range of rums as all-encompassing as Appleton.
Right.
Appleton, you have sort of the entry-level signature, you have the 8-year, you have the 12-year, now you have the 15, you have the 21, and then, also kind of more special limited release stuff like the Joy bottlings over the year. You have the Hearts collection that was just
30
done.
Year.
The 30 year.
Yep.
And so you have like all these little entry points, both in terms of age and in terms of price and things like that. So that's kind of, I think, what makes Appleton a real gateway, not just for like trying Jamaican rum for the first time, but getting more into rum, because you can do it in an affordable way and sort of see the differences in various ages and things like that. And then, Wray Nephew Overproof, it's sort of... it's hard to get information about New Yarmouth Estate, but it's generally thought that is the distillery where Wray Nephew Overproof is made. But and I think Wray Nephew Overproof, people have heard me talk about it on this podcast before, but it's one of those rums that you just can't skip as you're getting into rum.
Right.
If you haven't had it, you should definitely have a bottle, and it's an iconic rum.
I think it's important also to mention that they're owned by a larger corporation, Campari. Right. So that they're that's probably one of the reasons why we have this wide range of availability and distribution. Is because of that. That's benefiting them getting everywhere and out there in all the places you can find them. I think what's also that comes along with that is important to note that there's both pot and column still here with these products. So you have, depending on which of the brands that you get, they'll have some blends there, and they're a well-known Jamaican rum that goes well with a lot of different styles of things that you want to do in terms of cocktail making. And I defer, of course, to Will and many others in terms of cocktail making.
No, please don't defer. You're in trouble if you defer to me on making cocktails.
Well, you're the better of the two of us, let me tell you, but I'm working on it. I just know that Appleton seems to play nice in a lot of things, at least in my limited experience, and that their range does well. Partly, I think, Will, because my experience with the Appleton line, like the 8, the 12, and even the 21, is there's a little bit of that funk, what they call that hago in there.
A kiss.
But it's not, a kiss of it, right? Exactly. But it's not going to knock you over.
Yeah.
But even people who are new to Jamaican rum will pick up on that.
Right. Yeah.
Most of the time.
That's something I have to remind myself sometimes is when I taste those rums, I said this earlier, but to me, I wouldn't describe any of their rums as funky, but it's kind of like spicy food. I have some people in my family.
That's a good analogy.
I really like spicy food. There's some people in my family who absolutely cannot tolerate spicy food. And I'll have something that I think is completely mild and they'll be like, oh my God, this is so spicy. So it's kind of that effect a little. When you're newer to rum, you might be like, oh yeah, I get funk a little bit, but so it's more of a maybe like a little radio friendlier in some respects, but I mean, I recommend Appleton all the time. So they have great products, and it's
hard to go wrong with them, right? The legacy is there. Joy Spence, their master blender, is an institution in rum, and with her backing it, and with knowing that they don't add additives to this. By the way, Jamaican rum really doesn't allow for additives in their processes.
Yeah, other than color correction, caramel, things like that. Yeah, if you have a Jamaican rum, it's not going to have sugar in it unless, it was Jamaican rum sourced through a third party and then, bottled somewhere else.
Right,
and,
right. It can get confusing, sticky, right? But if it comes from a distillery in Jamaica and it's bottled by that distillery, right, we can say definitively that's not going to have sugar added.
Yeah, I think it's safe most of the time if you see a Jamaican rum to assume that it is not going to have additives, again, unless it's from a third-party brand, then that can happen. But that's another one of the nice things about Jamaican rum is you have a little bit more kind of assurance of what you're getting in the bottle.
Right.
Real quick, before we dive into sort of our recommendations for J. Wray Nephew, one thing I wanted to also mention is just kind of a category for each of these, like where else might you have seen their rum before? Because a lot of these distilleries, they have other brands and things like that, or there are people who source their rum and have developed, popular brands around that. So one brand like that is, it's not owned by a third party, but Karuba rum is rum from J. Wray Nephew. So not everyone knows that, but kind of good to know. Karuba, by the way, there was actually a pretty cool article that I think was on VinePair recently, just kind of like an ode to Karuba rum and like the spot it has behind the bar. It's kind of this beloved ingredient by a lot of bartenders, and it's not the kind of rum you would buy to drink neat necessarily, but it's a really fun rum to have. I'll link to that article in the show notes so people can check that out. But yeah, if you've seen Karuba, that has rum from J. Wray Nephew as well. But John, let's talk about our picks. So if you were recommending a cheaper, less expensive rum from the J. Wray Nephew family, what would it be? And if you were recommending one where price is less of an object, what would it be?
Well, so I thought about this a little bit as I was putting this together because we've recommended...
I'm glad you thought about it a little bit.
What I mean by that is I went back through what we've recommended before, and I know there are certain bottles in this from this distillery that we've recommended many times. Yeah. To your point, I think you said earlier, I want to recommend one that I don't think this is a beginner rum, in a way, but I think it can be. Okay. And if you do it right. So what I'm going to recommend here is no surprise to anybody talking about this. Wray and Nephew Overproof is fantastic.
That's my
For the price, Will, I see this commonly for like a $17 to $25 range here. And I mean, you're getting so much flavor out of this. Yeah. And yes, you're not going to want to sip this neat, especially if you're new into Jamaican rum or even kind of just feeling your way out into rum in general. But if you put this with Ting, which we mentioned in the intro, which is a grapefruit soda made in Jamaica, it makes the classic Wray and Ting. Yeah. And if you do that, just to find any recipe that there's the standard mix for that, it doesn't get much better than that, Will.
Yeah, and don't undersell the Wray and Nephew neat pour. Always a good exercise, especially if you're a rum enthusiast.
Right. So, I mean, it's just hard to go wrong with that bottle. And you mentioned, Will, that it's the best seller in Jamaica. So if you're looking for the cultural side of the experience of this, I really think you get it with that bottle and at an inexpensive entry price. Yep. So don't miss that one. So Will, do you that was your same pick
that was
for your
mine
inexpensive?
Too. Again, I'm not going to try to overcomplicate this or get too cute with some of these picks. Right. If you're getting into Jamaican rum, and I mean, you have to have that bottle. It's part of the 101 syllabus.
I agree with you.
Now, on the more expensive side, I can give my recommendation here. The nice thing about Appleton, like I said, is that they have a wide range of different price points. And so depending on, what is expensive to you, how much you're willing to buy, there's always going to be something good. And I think you get into kind of like, by the time you get to Appleton 8, for me personally, I'm already at a rum that I think is really good on its own. And Appleton 8 is, between, I think it's like a little over $30. So it's not even really, it's still very affordable. So what I want to do is kind of give my personal guide to the Appleton range, because that's where I think your second buy should come after you get the Wray Nephew Overproof. Yeah. So here are my kind of recommendations. If you're looking at the older end of things, so and like the most common older rums from Appleton right now, I would say, are going to be the 15 and the 21.
Yep.
Those aren't as easy to find as the 12 and the 8, for example, but on the upper end of things. And if you're trying to decide between those, I would recommend going with Appleton 15 over 21. It's about half the cost. I think it's generally around $60. Appleton 21 is generally well over 100. And I just personally enjoy 15 more. 21 is really good. It's a good product. For me, it's just, particularly if you're like an oak averse person, I would say stay away from 21. It's a very oaky rum to me. 15, I think, is more in the sweet spot. And so point number 1 of Will's Guide to Appleton, I would recommend Appleton 15 over 21. If you're deciding between the 8 and the 12, I know 80% of people are going to tell you to go with the 12. I'm part of the 20% that's going to tell you to try Appleton 8.
Ooh.
I think I've said this on the podcast before. So, if you've heard this, I'm sorry. But to me, Appleton 8 has a little bit more of the fruity character that I think is really nice about Jamaican rum. 12 is kind of more into the barrel notes and stuff like that. And again, they're both fantastic. So yeah. I'm just saying my personal preference, I would go 8 over 12. And then if you're someone who you've got a few $100 to spend and you want to do some hunting, then I would say definitely go hunting for the Hearts collection, which we mentioned earlier, which is a collaboration between Appleton and Vellier. 100% pot still rum. I think it's the only 100% pot still Appleton you're going to find out there right now. Yeah. And there have been several different vintages released as part of that collection so far. I tried all of the initial 3 that were released. I have not tried the subsequent ones. But of those initial 3, the 94 and the 95 were just incredibly good. So if you want to spend $200-$300 on a bottle of rum, I would say go searching for those. But again, those are hard to find. The other ones you're going to be able to find almost anywhere. So yeah, that's me. What about you?
So first of all, I think that was really comprehensive, and I kind of agree with everything you said. I don't really have any kind of difference there. I think you're spot on with the 15 versus the 21. I fully agree there. Salute. I think you're spot on with the 8 and the 12.
Really? Are you on my side there?
I am on your side. I've come around to your side since you first recommended it and did that. And part of the reason is... minds. Yeah, well, I think what it is, we're just so tied to numbers of aging years being better, and it takes a lot to kind of shrug that off.
It really does.
If you do a blind taste test with those, I just find there is a little bit more character to play around with and enjoy in the 8, especially if you're going to have the 15 next to it already. You don't need the 12. So that works really well. The only thing I'm going to disagree just slightly, it's really not disagreeing with you, because I do agree that the Hearts collection is just fantastic. I'm finding it hard to want to spend $300 or $400 on a bottle.
Oh yeah, I mean that's totally defensible. I mean, I for me, my ceiling on what I personally will buy for a bottle of anything is gonna be right around $300. And if I buy a $300 bottle of something, it's probably gonna be the only one I buy that calendar year. Right. Just because for me, there's diminishing returns. And I don't have as much of the collector mindset. Right. If you have that collector mindset and you enjoy having something rare, you get a lot of satisfaction out of that, then,
that's going to,
that's really going to satisfy that, because it is rare. It's 100% pot still Appleton rum. And it's really good. So
it is really great.
I don't think you're going to be disappointed in it, but I totally get that philosophy. I think you can go your whole life never paying over $100 for a bottle of rum and still have an amazing experience.
And I hope it always stays that way. So part of this is kind of my silent protest in a way of saying, I just really don't want what happened with bourbon to happen with rum, where everything becomes $300 to $500 and plus for anything good. But that said, I fully agree with you. I have Joy, by the way, the bottle Joy, which is, I didn't pull it out for this, to be honest, but I know it's more than 21 years age. I think it's roughly 25 or a blend thereof. But what I will say is I really enjoy that one as well. No pun intended. But if I had to go do it over again, would I spend the $150, $180 I spent on it? I don't know that I would, although it is the best looking bottle in my collection. I just
nice
love that bottle. It is beautiful. So that's a statement piece. If you're looking for a statement piece, that Joy bottle, which I don't think you can really find anymore, unfortunately. And if you do, it's probably going to be twice the price it was when it was first out. But just to mention that it is a thing and it is out there. So,
and that what you were saying about buying it once and not buying it again, like that's basically how I feel about the 21, for example.
Right.
Whereas I would buy another bottle of the 15. So there you have it.
Should we move on to the next distillery here?
Yeah, let's move on. What do we have next?
All right, so I think our next one's going to be Worthy Park Estate. I'm just going to shout from the rooftops here. I think this is my favorite Jamaican distillery.
Yeah. You've been vocal about that, and rightfully so.
Yeah,
it's also interesting because we go from what's kind of been an institution of Jamaican rum to this is the newest of all the distilleries we've talked about,
and the oldest.
And the old, so the Worthy Park Estate goes all the way back to the 17th century. There are records indicating that distillation began there in the 18th century, but rum production stopped in 1960, and it didn't begin again until...
Thanks, boomers.
Yeah.
Wait, that's not the boomers.
Yeah, that's pre-boomers. They would have been.
Okay, thanks, pre-boomers. So, sorry, go ahead. Yes.
Greatest Generation. I don't know. The generation names get fuzzy to me after that. But so modern production, like kind of the current era of Worthy Park, that began in 2005. It's owned by the Clark family. They go back 4 generations, but they, basically were kind of decided in 2005 to bring back rum production. And so, all the pot stills that are there and everything, and it's all pot still, by the way, at Worthy Park. Those are new stills. They're not using stuff from, pre-1960 and stuff like that. Like they built a new distillery basically. And also they grow sugarcane still at Worthy Park, and they have a mill for processing the sugar. They sell their own, brand of sugar as well. And so they have that, molasses that they can get. Yeah. It's all part of the estate.
That's the magic to me, Will, is that there's that single estate value, that there's something there that I just really appeals to me, that they have all of that on site and that they're doing all that in-house, I guess you would say. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's always kind of a cool bonus, I think. Worthy Park, they make a range of rums there. We're not going to do like a mark by mark breakdown of all of these distilleries. I will say we'll link to a bunch of articles. Matt Petrick has done some wonderful work on
Don't reinvent the wheel.
Getting all the details and stuff in one place. So like if you want to do the deep dive into all the rum marks and stuff, we're going to link to a bunch of Matt's articles that break that down and made all that information very accessible. But yeah, I think one note with them is, we've talked to Zan Kong before, and he's said many times they do not use dunder and muck at Worthy Park to achieve their high ester rums and things like that. They do have some very, very long fermentation times for their high ester mark. I believe go up to like 3 months and things like that. So you can definitely experience some of like the upper ends of funkiness with Worthy Park rums if you get some of the high ester marks and things like that. Brands associated with Worthy Park, you have the Rum Bar brand. If you've ever seen that before, that is Worthy Park, one of Worthy Park's brand. And then you also have kind of like the Worthy Park Estate brand. So I would say the Worthy Park brand is more higher priced stuff, whereas Rum Bar is more entry level rums
or bar.
Yeah,
a bar rum.
Yeah, big. Well, but yeah, bars, big in bars. It's Rum Bar. It's Rum Bar rum. There you go.
Rum-bar. That's right.
But yeah, Worthy Park. I think what they've managed to do, having only been around since 2005 is pretty remarkable in like the quality that they're like. I don't want anyone to hear like, oh, they basically started all this new, like they're way behind in terms of quality and stuff, because I don't really think that's the case.
Definitely
their rums are amazing. They have their own branded products. They also sell a good amount of rum in bulk as well. In the where else have you seen this category, a few brands that do a lot of Worthy Park rum. Hamilton rums here in the US. If you've ever had Hamilton Jamaica pot still rums, those are sourced from Worthy Park. The Funk is another one that you reminded me of. Not as ubiquitous as Hamilton, I would say, but another one that is Worthy Park rum. And I mean, you'll find Worthy Park rum in lots of stuff, and you won't see it being labeled Worthy Park anymore because they're protective of that brand name. But you can encounter it in a lot of places. They also, I think, have a growing range of products that makes it accessible to experience it at different levels. But you open this with talking about this as being your favorite Jamaican distillery. What are the hallmarks? What are your recommendations here?
Well, so see, here's what I find with Worthy Park, as opposed to some of the other distilleries that we already talked about or are going to talk about, is I feel like there's some sort of sense of a refinement to this rum within its category that I'll give you an analog, which is when we went to Europe recently, what we noticed in a lot of the food dishes that we ate in Europe versus here in America.
The food dishes?
The plates, I don't know, the restaurants, what we ate over there, that the flavors were combined in such a way that they felt more in harmony, and it was not bold. When I think American cuisine, a lot of times I think of like bold, in your face, we're gonna give you flavor. And over there in Europe, what we experienced in Italy and in Paris, in France, was the cuisines feel more refined and rounded in a way that complements things.
When you say refined, do you mean like subtle?
Yes, that's what I mean. Right.
Okay.
So things are not slapping you over the head with this outrageous flavor. Even the gelato in Italy, the combinations that they're doing, they have this sort of kind of structure of harmony to them, that things just feel like they work well together. You can pick out things, but nothing is really slapping you over the face
like
with
chocolate chip, cookie dough, Oreo overload blast gelato flavor.
Yeah, and I mention that because I think for me, the Worthy Park Estate rums, especially their single estate reserve, but even the Rum Bar products and others, the Hamiltons, they have this kind of just nice balance that they achieve. And so, yes, you can get some of the funk there. Yes, you get some estery, overripe banana or banana notes. I really actually feel like the banana is very present for Worthy Park.
Yeah,
especially in the nose.
I think Richard Seal once said that nobody does banana better than Worthy Park. So
well, he's right. I once again, yes. And there's, for me, not a better Jamaican rum for my personal palate than Worthy Park.
So what are you reaching for then? If someone's coming up to you and saying, John, I want to get into Worthy Park, what's my gateway? What's like the cheap? What's the less expensive way to get into Worthy Park? And then
here's kind of where I'm going to go. I have kind of 3 levels with this one. I'm going to cheat a little bit, but I'll be quick. The first one is the Rum Bar Overproof is pretty fantastic. I tried it right against the Wray Nephew, which would be a similar type of rum in that high ester unaged, or should I say just really funky unaged.
Yeah, rum Bar Overproof is basically their competitor for Wray Nephew Overproof. Yeah.
Yes. And I will say that they are different.
For sure. Yeah, there's a big difference.
They're different, but I thought Rum Bar Overproof is no less enjoyable. And yes, it's different, but man, I really still enjoy it. So again, if you're looking for a rum that is going to get you a lot of bang for your buck, and you can experience Worthy Park unaged, that's really great. Again, not something necessarily that you're going to come out of the gate and sip with, although people do it. I've seen people who do it.
For sure. And if you take our other recommendation and get the Wray Nephew Overproof, start building yourself a little overproof lineup to compare. It's super fun.
And then the next one is kind of the next step up for me is the Worthy Park Single Estate.
Okay.
So that one's going to be a little bit more expensive on the, I've seen it for roughly
50,
65
60,
to, in that range somewhere. But absolutely a great bottle to have, worth it. It's a 45% ABV, so it's a little step up from the 40, which I think is the right way to come into an aged Jamaican rum, where you're not up in the high ABV for an aged rum, and you can experience these flavors at a moderate level, but still giving you enough of what you're looking for to experience what that is. This Worthy Park Single Estate it's a blend of rums that's aged somewhere in between 6 and 10 years as a blend, and it really just kind of shows the attention and care they make with this as a kind of a standout product for me that you can't really do much better in that price range.
Tastes like banana bread to me.
Yeah,
I mean,
I
that in a
totally
good way.
agree. No, I definitely agree that there's a banana bread type of thing you get, not overwhelmingly to the point where it's like, oh, wow, I can't distinguish this.
Yeah, it's not like, oh my God, bananas, but it's just
and
that
nothing
kind
else.
of,
Right.
Yeah, it's that combination of kind of that overripe
Yeasty?
banana, but in that kind of like sweet baked good sense as well that you get from the aging and stuff. That's why I think what it makes me think of banana bread as opposed to super bright tropical banana. It's more like that kind of soft like baked banana with like, some nice sweet spices and things like that going on.
Maybe even baking chocolate type of thing.
Yeah.
Yes,
I think
exactly.
it like that rum to me kind of is emblematic of how you described Worthy Park in the first place. Like it's got that sort of, I don't even know it. Like that rum, if you're new to Jamaican rum, might feel a little funky, but to me, it's very buttoned up kind of.
Yeah, but again, that's why I would say it's kind of that giving that subtle hints of things, but not knocking you over.
Yeah.
Which is why I think it's kind of to me, for an aged Jamaican rum that is a high quality Jamaican rum, this is a great bottle to have.
Yeah.
And I would absolutely recommend it. I'm going to stop there and see what you recommended, Will, and we'll see if we come back around to the third one I thought of.
Yeah, so my inexpensive recommendation, again, we're on the same wavelength. It's Rum Bar Overproof. You'll notice this as a trend continuing with the next distillery we talk about as well to complete the trinity of unaged Jamaican overproofs. But yeah, I would go with that. I think if you go to a bar that has Rum Bar Overproof, and you'll see more and more now places carrying it, especially if you go to like a cool bar, like a cool rum bar where like the bartenders are into rum and stuff.
Yeah.
You'll definitely find Wray Nephew in places like that, but more and more I'm starting to see Rum Bar Overproof. And if you can get like a skilled bartender to make you like a rum bar daiquiri or something like that, it's so good. When I was in Charleston doing the ACSA tasting, which Zan was a judge on as well, we hit up some bars and somewhere they made us like a banana daiquiri with Rum Bar Overproof, and it was just fantastic. So yeah, Rum Bar Overproof, do a blind lineup with the other overproofs and see what you like the best. But I really do love how between Rum Bar Overproof, Wray Nephew, and the other one we're going to talk about next, like they really do each bring something totally unique to the table while also like fitting sort of the same
staying
archetype.
in the category.
Yeah, it's so cool. On the more expensive side, I'm going to depart from your recommendation. And normally I always recommend people start with the distillery branded bottles and things like that.
Right.
And in some respect, my recommendation includes this, but I have found the more expensive Worthy Parks that I enjoy the most have either been like the single barrels, kind of like the FRS pick, the Gemini barrel, which we've talked a lot about on the podcast from Worthy Park, is fantastic. Obviously that, was a barrel pick, so there's not a lot of that in terms of availability. But then even like some of the independent bottler releases, like the Habitation of Velier stuff, the Worthy Park things that they've done over the years have been phenomenal. And I've tended to enjoy those a little bit more than things like the Estate Reserve, for example. I would kind of rather pay like a little bit more, like 70, 80, 90 than, pay 60, 70 for that. So, but that's just my personal taste. I find in a lot of those releases, you get a little bit more of the in-your-faceness, I think. Yeah. A little bit more funkiness, bit more like bright fruits and stuff like that, as opposed to kind of like the sort of roasty baking shop, like aged, barrel characteristics, that sort of thing. So that's kind of where my mind gravitates with higher priced Worthy Park stuff.
I don't disagree with you on any particular aspect there. I get where you're going. Where my mind was kind of going,
it's all preferences, really.
Yeah. Well, what I meant to kind of give here is my conception of this episode is hopefully we'll have a few people who are listening who maybe are just getting into the category a little bit more than our usual audience is. Our usual audience is going to know all these things that we're talking about and definitely would agree with many of those independent bottler releases being fantastic. In fact, I would say one of the top 5 rums I've ever had was that Worthy Park. I think it was the 2007 Habitation Velier.
The WPM.
Oh my goodness, it was just so good. And, we had like you mentioned, the Florida Rum Society Gemini barrel pick was the WPM after that I just find fantastic. But I just don't want to be those people who are just getting into it and can't find any of those.
For sure.
So there is nothing wrong with, I think, starting with the single estate reserve bottle, which is a little more widely available. So that's where I agree with you. That's going to lead you down that rabbit hole to those other releases. And when you find them, pick them up because you'll be really, really happy with those as well.
Yeah. I would even say like some of the like one more widely available one, especially here in the US, like the TCRL, some of the Worthy Park stuff that they've done. Yeah. Really super solid.
Yes.
And that's Transcontinental Rum Line, by the way. And how you'll know it's Worthy Park is, I can't remember if they're going to keep doing this or not. I know in the past they were putting WP on the label.
Yeah.
Like WP Jamaica or something like that. So
it's like wink, wink.
Yeah, and they've done Hampden ones as well that say HD on them. But yeah, you can find some great ones there as well.
All right, so let's move on to the next distillery. Will, I'm going to let you start with this one because I think you have an affinity for this.
Yeah, so next we have Hampden Estate. So John and I have talked about on the podcast before how he's kind of a Worthy Park man. I'm kind of a Hampden man in the sense of, those being our respective favorite Jamaican distilleries.
Yeah.
Hampden is another one of the distilleries here that has a history that goes way back. I think the difference between it and Worthy Park would be, I don't believe there was an extensive period of time where Hampden stopped producing rum. So they started distilling in the 18th century as well. Hampden has been owned by the Hussey family since 2009. So they've gone through some ownership changes over the year, but kind of like the modern era of Hampden. Actually, I think we named our episode where we interviewed Christelle Harris. I think we titled it The Modern Era of Hampden Estate. Yeah. Because her family coming in 2009. Prior to that, Hampden never had its own, distillery branded products. Like all of their rum basically was sold in bulk, a lot of it overseas and stuff like that. And then, other people would buy it and kind of create their own brands around it. You couldn't go and buy like a rum that was like Hampden Estate on the label before this sort of new wave of ownership. So Hampden, like Worthy Park, is all pot still. Another thing that's particular to Hampden, which I think is super cool, it's all natural fermentation. So they don't add yeast of their own.
Right.
It's just like
wild.
What's in the air of the distillery is what starts the fermentation up. In terms of distillery brands, Rumfire is their Jamaican overproof brand. So if you've seen it before, you will never forget the label. It's the one with the orange and blue flames that says Rumfire in really big letters on it.
Yep.
And then like Worthy Park, they have the Hampden Estate brand as well, which if you look at the bottles and kind of squint at them and say, hey, these look familiar, it's because they look like Velier bottles. They have a distribution partnership with Velier. And I think Velier has kind of been instrumental in a lot of ways in like kind of guiding their rollout and, providing some guidance and things like that and putting those rums together. So this is just a super cool distillery. It's on my bucket list of places to visit before I die. And I think this is also a good time to talk a little bit about what we mean when we talk about dunder and muck, because those are sort of two Jamaican rum vocabulary words that get brought up a lot and are a big part of understanding kind of the high ester rum production process. Again, you don't have to use dunder and muck to make high ester rum. But it is one way to do it, and Hampden does use it. So you'll hear people talk about dunder a lot. All dunder is there's a lot of words for it. It's used in lots of different cultures. People just don't call it dunder in other places.
Right.
It's stillage, vinasse. It's what's left over after you run the still, basically. So that's all dunder is. You can take it out. You can add it to fermentations and things like that. And a lot of times you hear people talk about dunder pits, which is kind of a misconception. Like dunder that is used in rum doesn't always come from a pit. When we get into things like pits, what we're actually talking about is something called muck, which includes dunder, and I think is kind of where the confusion comes from. But muck is basically like, I'll use a definition. This is how National Rums of Jamaica defines it, which we'll talk about them a little bit later. But they defined it as a semi-solid mass comprising fermenter bottoms, organic material such as various fruit, and spent wash, which is dunder, essentially. So you can keep it in a pit or a tank or something like that. and it allows bacteria to form and to create more acids. And remember, we were talking about how esters are made. You need acids. So you basically get this like soupy sludge type stuff that can supercharge ester creation in your fermentations. So that's what muck is. Again, it's not used in like every rum made at Hampden, but for some of those high ester marks that they do, they will use that to kind of supercharge that ester creation that's in there. So again, it's not just under, it can be stuff left over from fermenters. Fruit has a way of finding its way in there. I think sometimes, distilleries, they have their different methods and stuff. I've heard stories about people saying jackfruit in at Hampden before. And a lot of like these muck pits can be left a long time, like years at a time, before they kind of like, start over with them or things like that. So yeah, it's really interesting. And I think a lot of times when people hear about it, they're like, is this like safe? Because you've got, bacteria and all kinds of like strange stuff happening in here. But all of that, nothing, distillation kind of like takes that stuff out of it, essentially. So there's not going to be bacteria in the rum or anything like that, as long as proper safety measures are taken.
Yeah. It's kind of like a living organism in the same way as sometimes people cultivate yeast, for a long period of time. I think there's a kind of an analog there that there's this kind of living element to it that helps, as you said, I think supercharge is the right way to put it, what you're going to then be able to do with it. So it is, I will say Hampden, of all the rums that I've had from Jamaica, definitely has the most of that funkiness to it, or it's even hard to define because, again, from distillery to distillery, it doesn't give you the exact same flavor profile. But their funk, Hampden, is heavy in the rums that are those products that have it.
I would say a lot of Hampden rums for me have like a brash quality to them, a little bit, a little punchy, that kind of thing. And that's not to say that like they can't be, refined and things like that. Like they have some really elegant rums, but there is this sort of like edge, I would say a lot of them have. And there's definitely ones out there, like there are softer ones out there, there are harsher ones out there, but Hampton's got just kind of like an attitude to its rums that I really enjoy. And, you brought up banana with Worthy Park. Banana is kind of like present in a lot of Jamaican rums, but one just flavor note that sticks out to me in a lot of Hampden rums is pineapple, which I like. That's what comes to mind a lot when I think about Hampden rums. And pineapple to me is like the goat fruit. I absolutely love pineapple, and so that might be where my affinity for Hampden comes in. But
gotcha.
So to distinguish in very broad terms,
that is, we're painting with broad brushes
here.
Yes.
Exactly.
But interestingly, I agree that there is that pineapple kind of note that you get in Hampden. And just to kind of make it clear, at least for what I get on my palate, it's not necessarily always like the sweet flesh of the fruit pineapple. It's also like a little bit more of the rind and the core almost of like, there's that pineapple-y thing, but it's not overpoweringly sweet at all. Yeah. So sometimes we confuse pineapple with a sickly sweet type of flavor, or just very sweet, I should say. But that's not what I'm getting most of the time. I get definite pineapple notes, but I get some of the pineapple without all of that sweetness behind it.
Yeah, and kind of like a sharpness to it sometimes as well. So yeah, Hampden, I would say it's got to be in your lineup of Jamaican rums, and it's great that I think since the distillery started having its own brands, you can sort of experience Hampden rum that's aged entirely in Jamaica and things like that. So you're able to experience it in a way now that you really couldn't, a decade ago, for example. So in terms of recommendations here, I already hinted at this for my inexpensive recommendation. I'm saying go with Rumfire. It is their unaged overproof rum. Line it up next to Wray Nephew Overproof and Rum Bar Overproof and have a little taste test. To me, Rumfire is what I would personally describe as the funkiest of all of them.
Yes.
to me, like Rumfire and Rum Bar Overproof are the funkiest, but they're funky in different ways.
I agree.
Which we've talked about, sort of like the limits of the word funky and being able to like convey nuance and stuff in the past. But Rumfire, to me, it has this kind of like sweetness to the funkiness of it, whereas Rum Bar Overproof to me has more of like a savory, almost like in the direction of agricole to an extent. It's like I get kind of like those like olive savory notes more with Rum Bar Overproof, whereas Rumfire I get like a little bit more of like that like sweet pineapple kind of funkiness as well. But yeah, it's I would say it's the one where like if you make 3 cocktails in equal proportions, like to me, the Rumfire cocktail will like Rumfire, like the spirit will be the most obvious in that one, as opposed to the other two. It's going to
bust down the door in most things.
Yeah, and that's not to say the other ones aren't extremely,
that's true,
detectable as well, because they are. But Rumfire is just that special.
Yeah, that the label, like you mentioned earlier, with the flames, and like I don't know, every time I see it on the shelf, in my head, I always hear like the a gas grill starting. That like sound and like rum fire, like I don't know why, but that's exactly what it does for me. It's just so fun. It's a fun rum, and it really is something that is just it will absolutely knock your socks off with how strong and bold it is, and can be used in so many different ways to really spice up other things.
Absolutely.
So it's a great pick, and I agree with that in full. Yeah. So did you have another pick for this?
Yeah, so on the more expensive side of things, what I'm going to recommend here, it's going to be a distillery bottling, and it's going to be one that is about to change very soon. So actually, if you're listening to this in the future, what I'm recommending now, you might not be able to get, but I just want to I don't want to create like a panic or whatever. People already know this is happening. Like Hampden has been transparent that they're changing this, but when Hampden released their like Hampden Estate branded rums, they had 2. They had the Hampden Estate 46, which was the 46% ABV rum. Yeah. I believe when they released it, it was 7 years. I think it's now 8 years old. But they also released at the same time Hampden Overproof, which was 60% ABV. And there's actually been a lot of like conflicting information over the years about like the differences between these rums and like what marks were in each one. And I heard a lot of people, I think I even myself said that like there wasn't any difference between those rums other than the proof. I've actually heard from people that I think would know that that wasn't the case, that 46 was always the OWH mark.
Right.
While the Overproof was a blend of 80% OWH and then 20% LFCH and DOK. That's the version of it that I trust the most. And I don't think it's Hampden trying to hide anything in the confusion over that. I just think it's like, I think a lot of consumers and blogs and stuff kind of did some guesswork and might not have been completely right. But anyway, the Overproof, it's soon changing. They are changing it from the original makeup to the HLCF mark. It's going to be called HLCF Classic. I think it's still going to be called Overproof, actually, but I think it's going to say HLCF Classic on the label. HLCF, it stands for Hampden Light Continental Flavored. So this is kind of like a, not to get too far into the marks and stuff, but it's kind of the middle range of Hampden. It's 500 to 600 ester level, which is very high, like in terms of just if you're comparing it to all rums in the world. But for Hampden, it's middle of the road in terms of like what they're capable of making there. And I believe it is going to be 4 years old, whereas the original one, I believe, was older than that. So now is kind of the last chance to get that original Hampden Overproof bottling. I already went out and bought myself a bottle. I'm not trying to like hoard and stock up or anything like that. Don't go out and be the person who buys like 20 bottles or whatever so other people can't get it. But, grab 1 or 2 for yourself, save the rest for everyone else. Let's not create a panic here. But
there you go.
That's beyond everything I just talked about. Like the 46 and that original Overproof, I love them both so much. I think they really thread the needle of being approachable, but also like a little bit more, like advanced is the wrong word, but if you gave them to someone who was like their first rum ever, they might be kind of like, what the hell is going on here?
Yes, agreed.
But like once you're a little more seasoned, there's some funk to them, but it's not overwhelming. And they've got a lot going on, right? Yeah. And I just really like the balance in those releases. Yeah, I really love both of those rums. They're ones that I try to have at all times. And I would say for now, grab you some of the overproof. If you're getting to this a little later, I would say go. The 46 is always great. So yeah, what do you think, John?
The only thing I want to add to what you said there, and I agree with that, is that there's the Great House offerings, and these have been something that was initially only available there in Trelawney in the Hampden Estate to be purchased, but have since been released in more places, and you will see them. They're a little more rare, so I'm going to tentatively recommend it in the sense of availability. But if you happen to be around and you happen to see a bottle of Great House, it doesn't really matter what year. Yes, there are people who are going to debate which year is better. It's an annual release now, 2020, 2021, and grab it, because you will not be disappointed. It is a fantastic offering, and something that every rum fan or a person who is really enjoying, especially Jamaican rum, you cannot go wrong there. So even at the price of, it's about $120 or so, I've seen it for in that range. That's a fantastic rum for that price.
Yeah, I think the previous release was like 90, but it's gone up. Like the latest release was over 100, like you were saying,
and rightly so, in my opinion. And I don't say that very often.
Well, but it's interesting, because here's the thing: I have not regretted purchasing any Great House rums that I've purchased. I still like a Hampton Overproof better than all of them. I really do.
I don't know if I can go there with you, but
that's
I
cool.
respect it.
We can disagree. I'm just saying, whatever they kind of put together for that one, it just hits that sweet spot for me, and it's generally going to be around like a little over $70.
Right.
So really good price. But I mean, I'm not going to not recommend Great House. I'm just saying, if I can only recommend one, that's the first one I would start with. And at least while it's still around anyway.
Yeah. Well, we've got one more kind of, I don't even know what I'd say, category left here in a way of rums, because it's comprised of more than one distillery.
Yeah, we're going to do we're going to hit a couple distilleries here at the end with Clarendon and Long Pond. The name that comes up with these, so these are both underneath something called National Rums of Jamaica.
Right.
It's a little bit complicated to understand, but National Rums of Jamaica is owned in part by 3 different companies that own equal shares of it. So one is the National Sugar Company of Jamaica, so that's like state owned. I believe it used to be all state owned, and they kind of divested.
I think that's correct.
Yeah, and then another third of it is, interestingly, Demerara Distillers from Guyana, best known for their El Dorado brand. And then the third owner is Maison Ferrand, the owners of Plantation Rum. And they got that as part of their purchase of the West Indies Rum Distillery, which I think owned the share, and then it transferred, basically.
Right.
So kind of an odd ownership structure. And then it's also further complicated by the fact that so within National Rums of Jamaica, as I said, you have 2 distilleries. You have Clarendon and you have Long Pond. 27% of Clarendon is owned by Diageo. So it's like, what's the math there? 73% of Clarendon is owned by National Rums of Jamaica, which it itself is owned by 3 companies, and then 27% is owned by Diageo, which we'll talk about why in a second. But I guess we can start with Clarendon and talking about like why it has that part owned by Diageo. I think the first thing to know about Clarendon is they make an absolute ton of rum because they make they have some of their own brands, but they make a lot of rum that goes into 2 very ubiquitous brands. One is Captain Morgan, and the other is Myers. Myers was actually the first Jamaican rum I ever had. We'll circle back to that in a second. So yeah, Captain Morgan is owned by Diageo. I can't remember if Myers is or not. They might be, but so that's where that ownership comes in. And I believe if you're listening and you're like, I heard Captain Morgan was made in the U.S. Virgin Islands, that's true. I believe the spirit that is made for Captain Morgan from Clarendon, I believe it goes in like the EU version of Captain Morgan, because part of the reason they have the other facility in the Virgin Islands is because of the tax breaks they get for the US market. Right. And actually, before it was in the Virgin Islands, Distillery Cereales was the one making the rum for Captain Morgan that was sold in the US.
Boy, the captain gets around, doesn't he?
The captain does get around. And if you talk to the Cereales folks about Captain Morgan making the switch to the Virgin Islands, were not happy about that. Kind of a big part of their business kind of had the rug pulled out from under them. But
wow.
Thankfully, they've definitely bounced back in a big way since that happened. But anyway, that's not the exciting part of what is made at Clarendon, to be completely honest. But it's kind of interesting to know. So Clarendon also supplies rum for a brand that National Rums of Jamaica owns called Monty Musk, which you may have seen before. So obviously Clarendon making rum at this massive scale, they've got some big, huge, multi-column stills there. They also have pot stills there. A lot of different things going on there. They can make heavy rum. They can make light rum.
They do everything.
Yeah, they can do it all. And they also, if you've heard of another distillery called Innswood, that was a former Jamaican distillery. National Rums of Jamaica also owns Innswood, but it's not used as a distillery anymore. They use it as an aging facility now. So yeah, I think the brand to know with Clarendon is Monty Musk, but that's not 100% Clarendon. It is also made up of Long Pond rum. So Long Pond is another distillery with a very long history, dates back to 1753. They actually had to stop production in 2012 due to environmental issues with dunder disposal, which is a whole other fascinating side of rum distilling and distilling in general, is just like how you manage that side of things.
Right.
They began the process of reopening in 2016. Then in 2018, there was a massive fire that destroyed their 250-year-old heavy rum vat house, which is tragic in its own way. But they started rebuilding that in 2019. They were able to start producing light and medium rums again. And in 2020, they rebuilt the heavy rum vat house and resumed heavy rum production there. I believe for now, it's all pot still. There was an operational column still in use at Long Pond in the past, but I believe it's out of commission right now. And Long Pond is another place where they're going to be using dunder, muck, probably a little bit different version of the process that Hampden uses. They probably have their own approach. They also use something here, which maybe it used at Hampden as well, but I know specifically they use it at Long Pond because I've heard them talk about it. But they use something they call cane acid, which is pretty interesting.
I have not heard of this before. I'm going to be honest. So what is cane acid? Cane
acid is basically they take crushed cane stalks and put it in with rum wash. And another name for it is cane vinegar, but it's another one of these ingredients, you can use that also kind of can go into creating more esters, basically, along with things like muck and dunder. And yeah, it's actually pretty interesting. And Matt Petrick has talked about this, but you can go back and look at like sort of notes on Jamaican rum recipes from a long time ago, and you'll see some recipes where it was like only 20% of the rum was like fermented molasses. It'll be like 20% molasses, like 40% muck, 30% cane acid and stuff like that. So yeah, it has an interesting place in kind of Jamaican rum history. But yeah. So again, I think that's likely just used in some of the higher ester marks that they make at Long Pond. And they make some super high ester rums at Long Pond. So if you've heard of DOK for Hampden, Long Pond has a mark called TECC, and there's also like TECA, TECB, TECC. That's like their version of DOK, essentially. Super, super, super high ester.
With cane acid, I my brain flashes like back to like who was the first person that was like running the distillery that just was like, crushing up cane stalks and throwing them in the rum wash, and like people were like, "What are you doing?" And they're like, "I don't know. Let's just see what happens."
I mean, it's kind of like who was the first person to like eat an egg or something like that.
Exactly.
Like that must have been kind of a weird move to make, but I think a lot of that goes back to just like rum production's proximity historically to sugarcane, and just these things being around each other and stuff happening. But yeah, it's pretty fascinating. But going into like where you've seen these brands before, so again, we brought up Captain Morgan uses some rum from Clarendon, I believe, just for the EU. Myers rum comes from Clarendon, super popular Jamaican rum. Like I said, it was the first Jamaican rum I ever purchased. The first time I made a Mai Tai, I saw it needed Jamaican rum, and that's the rum I went with. And believe it or not, it's not a rum I purchase now, but that rum was kind of responsible for me trying rum neat for the first time and wanting to know more about it. So
we
always have a special place in my heart.
Yeah.
And then, like we were saying, Monty Musk is the National Rums of Jamaica brand, which contains rums from both Clarendon and Long Pond as well. Long Pond itself just released its first Long Pond branded product ever, just within the last year and a half, maybe. It was Long Pond ITP. ITP is one of the marks that they make there, and it was a 15-year-old rum.
Yep. You down with ITP?
Yeah, you know me. So yeah, that's kind of those distilleries in a nutshell. But in terms of recommendations to wrap everything up here, where do you go with it? For me, these are the hardest ones to come up with the recommendations for personally.
Yeah.
But where do you go with this?
So I have two, and the first one is actually Monty Musk. You mentioned a blend of the Clarendon and Long Pond. Their Classic Gold I've recommended before because I think it's at a nice price point. I think it's a good introductory Jamaican rum, especially for these two distilleries. So you can really try these two distilleries from a nice base to experience what they're bringing to the table. And then there's also the Special Gold that they have that's right above
Special
that.
Reserve, yeah.
Sorry, Special Reserve.
Yeah.
Thank you. The Special Reserve that's right above that is also very good. A lot of people, when we tried these together in a group, preferred that one to the Classic. Although I think I, for some reason, really kind of gravitated towards the Classic. I still think the Special Reserve was pretty fantastic for the price point, especially.
Yeah, I haven't had them next to each other before, but I'd love to compare sometime.
Yeah, the Special Reserve, you can tell it has a little bit of an additional aging to it, but still, I think the Classic brings something to the table that for me, worked. Again, balance is kind of a theme for me, and when there's a nice balance for a neat rum, I enjoy that very much.
Yeah.
So those are two for me that I think I like. And then just a quick note, I have tried the Plantation Extreme or Extreme, I'm not sure, Clarendon. That is, I think it was number 3, a 27-year aged Clarendon. Ooh. And I will tell you this was one that was another very expensive bottle that I probably wouldn't buy again just because of the cost for it. And you mentioned the diminishing returns.
Yeah.
I think that's present. This one, to me, I enjoy it. It gives me this kind of blackberry note that I've never gotten in any other rum, that I love unique things like that. But at the same time, I also feel like there's so much oak influence in it for the 27 years of aging that just kind of overpowers.
Yeah,
so
I get kind of a floral thing from a lot of Clarendon rums that I don't get as much in other Jamaicans. And also one note, you mentioned Plantation. Another place people might encounter Clarendon and Long Pond rums are in their Zaimaca rum, which again, Maison Ferrand owns a third of National Rums of Jamaica, so it's natural that Clarendon and Long Pond would go into their kind of flagship lower cost Jamaican rum. But yeah, I tend to go with Monty Musk as well. I think either of those, if you're starting out the lower price range, I think the Special Reserve you can get for like 38 to 50, somewhere in there. I think on the more expensive side for me, you kind of have to go to like independent bottlers basically from there, because there isn't really like a flagship distillery branded high priced Clarendon rum out there that I'm aware of. But Holmes Key released a really good Clarendon rum. It's labeled as Holmes Key Jamaica Wedderburn 2011. Again, that's going to be limited in some capacity. I think you can still get it if you want it. Like I've still seen some bottles around, but really expressive, really solid pick there that I would recommend.
All right, so I think that does it for all of the tour here. We took our time getting through all those.
I will say on the Long Pond side of things, that's another one that gets tricky, just because like there aren't, like we were saying, 100% Long Pond is tough to find unless you just go the independent bottler route. You will find a lot of like very expensive old Long Pond bottlings and stuff like that. I mentioned that fire. I should have pointed out that not all Long Pond rum was destroyed there when that happened. Yeah. Like there's still a lot of Long Pond casks out there and things like that you can find, but there's not that sort of like always available staple, especially on like the lesser expensive side of things, unless you want to go Monty Musk, which again it has Long Pond and Clarendon, but you're not just experiencing Long Pond. I will say that ITP release that we mentioned, which is like the only Long Pond branded release, although that is a sign that more is coming, so I'm sure this will change as things go on. I thought that release was very good, but I believe the price point was around $150.
Yeah. And I've seen it for $199.
To me, it not entirely worth the cost there. Again, unless you really love the idea of owning like the first ever Long Pond branded
it's historic.
rum, which is really cool. Yeah. So if you're into that, totally go for it. But I wouldn't really recommend it as just like a go-to or like the first thing to buy or anything like that. But I would say if you want to experience more expensive Long Pond, just like look up your favorite independent bottler, see if they've done some Long Pond, see what's available, and go with that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that wraps it up. So I think this is a format we're going to try out, not like one after the other. We'll probably do a couple more of these over the next few months and explore some other countries and things like that. But let us know what you think of the format, what we should do next. We always love to hear from our listeners. You can send us an email at host@rumcast.com. It's host@rumcast.com. Or you can hit us up on social media. John, where can they find us on social media?
Yeah, we're out there on social media everywhere. We're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, and YouTube. So you can go to any one of those formats and find us at the Rumcast, and we will tweet or respond and comment back to you there on those platforms as well. Let us know, like Will said, if you're enjoying a Jamaican rum that we missed a brand of. We would love to know. Yeah, that would be great to figure out where it belongs in this list and where we can put it. But we do hope that this was something we wanted to try out to get people who are probably a little bit more just figuring out rum and learning more about it. And for those of you who are well more experienced, do let us know what else do we need to put in here that we think will cover all the bases moving forward when we do this for other places or countries.
Yeah.
So definitely hit us up, let us know. We always appreciate so much everybody who's listening, and thank you so much. If you want to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/the Rumcast, and you can find us there and support the show there. Our next meetup coming up in not too long from now, and another bonus episode as well, and I'm excited about doing that. So.
All on the docket for June. Yeah, so come join the fun.
Yep.
But thanks everyone for listening. Appreciate the support as always. And John, I'll talk to you soon.
See ya.